Hello everybody and welcome to day 18 of the 30 days 30 critique sessions. We've got a great image here from F64 Elite member Jonathan HABER to critique. And before we get into the plot twist, I want to talk about something because on Thursday, that was yesterday, I just uploaded 12 critique sessions to F64 Elite. And these are two Elite members, Heike and Sonia, who both left in the comments different things about the critique sessions. So if you're liking what you see here on YouTube, just take a look at these comments. Pause it if you have to read these, because they'll give you some insight as to what happens over on F64 Elite with the critique sessions. Now let's go ahead and get into our twist. We actually have two twists because they both had 11 votes. One of them is from Vero's Photos and the other one is from John Dobson, our image critique yesterday. John Dobson says, use blend if on the current layer and not the underlying layer. Okay, we'll see if we can work that one in there. And then Vero's Photos says you must include 5 keyboard shortcuts in your workflow and explain why. Okay, I usually do use keyboard shortcuts a lot, but I'm not always the best at explaining why. So I can do that. I think I can do that. Let's get into the critique. Our critique image comes from Jonathan HABER. Thank you for providing this for us. I like this. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of when I went to France, and my developer and also great friend and practically brother Tony, who does the work on my panels for Photoshop. When I met him out there, we would go around Bordeaux and Saint-Emilion and Paris and just walking through those towns. And I'm not used to that kind of stuff. I really am not. I'm like as American as it comes, right? So when I would see that, like every little thing was so unique to me. You know, every alley I looked down, every street we walked past, I could literally just have my camera out taking pictures 24/7. I would probably look like the tourist fool, so I didn't do that. But that's what this reminds me of. And you know what's really neat about this is seeing those 3 birds, you know, kind of hanging out there. It's almost like those 2 birds are talking and the other one's like, all right, you know, when you guys are finished, I'll come and talk. Or it's like me when I see 2 people talking and I want to talk too, but I'm like that socially awkward person who just can't find a way in and have that discussion. Yeah, that's me. So it's not just about the architecture in the alley. It's also about the conversation that's happening between those birds. I do have some disconnects, and the first one is actually a straightening thing and possibly a crop thing. I feel like this is kind of like a waterfall. You know, if you ever take a picture of a waterfall or a forest and you can see all of the little highlights through the trees, it kind of takes away from the scene. It makes you think that there's a way out and there's an escape. And really what you want when you're in those forest images is all that patchy stuff to be filled in with leaves. So what I see here is that this space up here kind of feels like that to me. It's almost like the entry point of a waterfall, where a lot of times if you don't have some kind of like epic sky up there, you just crop it off at the top of the waterfall or somewhere in between the waterfall so you don't end up getting it. It's kind of what this is like. I mean, think about this as a waterfall. This would be the top of the waterfall dumping into the imagery. So if you're not giving it enough space up here, then it just feels a little awkward. So I'd probably crop this in. And while I crop that, I would also look for a place to straighten it off of, maybe off of these windows. And then the other thing is the processing of it. I enjoy the tonal work that you've done here, and I really do like the color work in general. But I feel like it's a haze of color or a wash of color rather than deliberate placement of color. There just seems to be this really strong wash of yellow over top of it, which is a form of color grading, yes, but I like to try to be a little bit more deliberate about the color grade and make it be a little bit more implied. So what I'm going to try to do here is reverse engineer the color grade and then imply that sepia or yellow kind of look over top of the image and see what happens with that. It might be that your artistic vision for the way that this came out ends up being better. That's 100% acceptable, but we're going to see what path we can take with that. So let's do it. Let's get into the work. Okay, so it looks as if when we get into here and open our image into Photoshop, it's a little bit bigger than the window. And a lot of times you can use these scroll bars and go up and down like this, but that's really annoying. If you pull it out, it'll kind of go like this, but then it's still too big for the screen. So I'll press Control-Alt-minus or Command-Option-minus on a Mac, and that will allow you to minimize that so that we can pull that in. That's number 1, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna do is work with the crop and the straightening. So I'll press C for the crop tool. Again, explain why. C for the crop tool, that's number 2. And we're gonna go ahead and go to the straighten tool. And I'm gonna straighten this off of these shutters right here. So right here to right here, okay, just like that. Because that is to me, the easiest vertical for me to see that could actually be vertical, because it looks like these walls could have been built a little wonky. We don't want wonky walls. So I'm gonna go ahead and press the Shift key that maintains my aspect ratio as I move this in. Again, that would be number 3. When you press and hold shift in the crop tool, it maintains the aspect ratio from whatever corner you decide to pull in from. And I'm also going to press and hold shift right here. So as I move it, we get that as best as we can in the center. I did say I wanted to crop off the top because it's kind of like that waterfall concept. If we can see where the waterfall is coming from, sometimes the mystery is gone. So we don't want to see where we can exit out of this image. Let's remove the mystery. So now it really becomes about this space. So if we look at the before, look at our history palette here, before, after, just tightens it in a little bit, gets us a little bit closer in. So I'm gonna do that same trick I did yesterday on how to fix a color cast, because I think this is really important. And I didn't really talk it through quite as much as I should have. So I'm gonna go into our actions here. And then our action that we have here is the color evaluation tool from the self-critique actions. Now, I've actually created my own hotkey for this, and I highly recommend you do this. I'll explain this one in a second. But if you press Control Shift and P, or Command Shift P on a Mac, it will play when I have an action selected. Now, that is not native in Photoshop, okay? So you can make your own hotkeys in Photoshop too. Control Shift P is not something that is used. So I think of that as play, okay? Control Shift play, or Command Shift play. So in order to change that, you go to Edit, go to Keyboard Shortcuts, and then up here in where it says Panel Menus, we're gonna do that. And then where it says Actions, and then where it says Play. You see right here? That shortcut would normally not be there. So if you would like that shortcut to make playing actions easier for you, go ahead. I'm an efficiency expert, I think, when it comes to Photoshop. And even just having to move from here down to here and then back up to another action is annoying. So while I'm in the actions panel, I can click on multiple actions, Control Shift P, Control Shift P, Control Shift P, and play as many as I want as I click them. So that would be my 4th hotkey, but that's also how you can make your own hotkey. Okay, so what we were doing was fixing the color here. I had to explain that though. And when I fix the color like this, because I did say that it feels like there's like this wash of yellow. And you know, when I turn this on and off, you can really see it. You can really see this like kind of vibrant yellow kind of effect that's happening on the image. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna put this back on. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for an area that is neutral. So to me, it looks like this pole might be neutral. So I'm gonna press and hold Control Shift Spacebar, or Command Shift Spacebar on a Mac. And that will give me the magnifying glass. That would be number 5. So that gives me the magnifying glass to move in and out of the image as I click on my left trigger end. So when I turn this basic color map on, that pole is what I'm going to neutralize as far as the color is concerned. So when I'm going to say neutral, you're looking for something that's what you believe to be 50% gray. I don't know if that pole is painted though, so this could be a problem. We'll see. So in the curve here, I'm going to select the neutral eyedropper and click somewhere on that pole. And then I can go ahead and Control and Shift, or Command and Shift on a Mac, and then right click and say Fit on Screen. Okay, so what that does is it just gives you the magnifying glass tool on the fly. You'll notice that I don't even have the magnifying glass tool in my toolbar. That's because I have the hotkey and I just use the hotkey for that. So now I'll turn this color map off and you'll see that we really neutralize this photo, but I see a little bit of magenta color cast coming through there too. So I'm not worried about that magenta right now because with what I put on afterwards, it might help. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to make a gradient map of this image. So I'm going to put on a gradient map. And what this gradient map is going to do is it's going to map out the tones based on the gradient. So it's saying anything that's the darkest dark is going to be in this white area. And anything that is the lightest light is going to be in the black area. So I want to color grade this with a gradient map using a deeper, more rich, maybe bluish color. Maybe we'll try blue, like a deeper blue in the dark areas. And then in the light areas, I'm going to add kind of a yellowish color. Okay, and I'll have that go like this. And I'm going to grab that to about like a, there we go, something like that. Okay, there we go. Try to keep the original intent of that color that they originally had. Okay, press Enter, and then press OK. And if we look at our gradient map, okay, you can see where it's all lying on our image. This is where we're going to try to use the top layer instead of the bottom layer with Blend If. So I'm going to double click this and see if it'll work. Sometimes it works on an adjustment layer, other times it doesn't. So if I move this over, oh, it does. Look at that, perfect. So on the topmost layer, I get to decide how much is going into the highest highlight areas of the image or how much is going into the darkest dark areas of the image. And you know, this is pretty much the same because we have an adjustment layer. So using this current layer or the underlying layer is going to give us the same results because this is just a container of the data essentially with that color resting on top of it. Where you would normally use that current layer is if you had a pixel layer, meaning if you had something duplicated, like maybe this layer 0 was duplicated, then you'd use the current layer. And I can show you something that will simulate that, but I probably won't end up going with the effect. So essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to blend this in by pressing Alt or Option and feather in that effect. Okay, so it's not so strong on those highest highlight areas, and it's not so strong on these darkest dark areas. And you start to see we can kind of blend this in exactly how we want this to look. If we want this to have that kind of vintage, more vintage effect, but still have that yellowish kind of tone to it. If you look at the before, it's very vibrant, it's very bright, it kind of screams at you. Whereas this kind of just subtly applies it rather than, it's more implied rather than forced. And then, you know, like there's other things in here that I kind of like these shutters. So if I make a selection for those, I'll just grab the object selection tool and trace around those areas like this. And then press and hold shift and then grab this one too. And then on our gradient map, I can press Command or Control I to invert that. So those, look at that. That's really cool. So we still get the original coloring of those shutters, and we still get that kind of sepia or yellowing effect without it being such a strong yellowing effect. Now I did say that I'll show you something that we could probably blend with this layer a little bit better. And that will be with something like making an Orton effect. So we'll press Control Shift Alt and E, or Command Shift Option E on a Mac. I think that's number 6. I might have got that botched up. I might have done a couple in between that I forgot about. But anyway, Control Shift Alt and E, or Command Shift Option E on a Mac makes a stamp of all of the stuff that happened underneath. It basically is a carbon copy, a Xerox copy of all the stuff that's happening underneath this layer. If I turn these off though, and I turn this on, this is a pixel layer. What that means is that all of the data that was down here has now been turned into pixels instead of non-destructive data. So if we change this to the soft light or screen blend mode, which is typically what we use for something like an Orton effect, then I'll go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur, and then I just kind of blur the junk out of this. All right. Now I drop the opacity, just like that. Okay. And then if I double click this, we can go into this layer, current layer, and then the underlying layer. Alt or Option, split and feather this. I guess that would have been number 7 because Alt or Option here, I did say that before. So I guess we're at like 7 shortcuts maybe. And then we can blend that a little bit more with the highlights. And this will kind of create like a soft focus effect where the dark areas kind of poke through those softer areas. Now this would be an artistic effect that unless Jonathan wants this, I wouldn't recommend it. That was really just for me to showcase how we would use blend diff in that way, where you have the current layer and the layer below when you have a pixel-based layer. Okay, so now we're going to drop the opacity of this, kind of blend the best of both worlds. This is going to kind of tame some of that yellow, and then here's your neutral. So look at the before and the after. Kind of get the same effect without it being so like staunch yellow. Now, if that was what you wanted though, I would just slowly start to taper down, not the gradient effect here, the gradient map, but slowly taper down the opacity of this. And then you can start blending the best of both worlds. I just think that that yellow can be quite strong to the viewer's eye initially, and let's imply it so that they want to walk down that path instead of being hit with like this wall of yellow. But great stuff though. I really enjoy the space that you've created. I enjoy the tone and your color processing here. It's the bones were there, the structure's there. We just gotta, it's just these little things are, I think, what set your images off to the next level. Our showcase image comes from F64 Elite member Dan Girth. This is pretty awesome. You know what I like about this? What I really like about this is how beautifully you've framed up the space for the moon to be in. You've kind of created almost like a plate for the moon to just rest in. And like the word that comes to my mind when I see this is stillness. Stillness. Slow, steady stillness. The crazy pace of the day, running around, shooting, finding the right thing to shoot, going all over the place, and then boom, we get there. The sun sets, the moon rises, and it's still. This image says stillness to me. And I love the amount of negative space you put here. There's this thing called negative space and positive space. And negative space is not to be looked at negatively. It's kind of like in the psychology world, there's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, okay? And a lot of times negative reinforcement gets a negative connotation, but negative reinforcement can be just as important as positive reinforcement. And here we have positive space that is just as important as that negative space and vice versa. There's so much vast openness above this moon and not a single star in the sky. It's about the moon on the rise and the sun on the set. And I think that that's wonderful. It's wonderful. I think the space that you've created is really well done. You didn't overdo the color. You didn't overdo the tonal work. You're not trying to force something upon me. You're just showing me this space, and it's beautifully crafted with just enough balance on the left and the right-hand side and a nice space to just hold that moon like a cup. Beautiful work. Thank you very much for sharing this with us, Dan. We're at 407 art kits, with a combined total, and that means engagement that happens on F64, which brings in about $1,022 so far, and the 102 donors that came through with $4,877 for a combined total of $6,099. So you might be sitting in a spot where you don't have the ability to donate. That's perfectly fine. Just engage with the content. Share the content so others can engage with the content. And that right there is going to help put art in kids' hands. I think we had some fun challenges in this critique session. Thank you so much for always putting something clever and creative down there. So if you want to give me a twist or a challenge, go ahead and put it in the comment section below. Whichever gets the most votes, it's going to make it happen tomorrow. All right, day 19. Let's keep this train rolling.